She was 18, and they threw her out with 1 copper coin and the clothes she stood in. No farewell, no blessing, just the great gate of the clan hold grinding shut behind her, and the laughter of the warriors who had watched her go. And with that single coin, the last thing she owned in the world, she bought a dead dwarf den, dug deep into the side of a mountain so far from any road that the nearest village was a half-day's walk through the pines. The shaft was caved in, the hearth was cold. The elders of that village laughed when they heard, and they said the den had been emptied 200 years ago, picked clean, worth less than the coin she spent on it. But what none of them knew, what not one soul in those mountains knew, was that beneath the hearthstone of that old den, in a vault that had been sealed since the day the dwarves were slaughtered, was something that would lift her above every clan that had ever spat at her feet. Before we go on, if stories like this stir something in you, take a moment and subscribe. And tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from. We love seeing how far these tales travel. Her name was Vrika, and she was born into the Brameth clan in the cold green country where the orkholds cling to the bones of the old mountains. The Brameth were a warrior clan, proud and loud and quick to anger, and they measured the worth of every orc born to them by one thing only: how well that orc could fight. Vrika could not fight. Or rather, she would not, and the difference never mattered to anyone but her. She was tall, even for an orc girl, with shoulders that promised strength and hands that the war mistress always said were wasted. But Vrika's hands did not want a spear. They wanted iron. From the time she could walk, she had been drawn to the clan's forge, the only warm place in the whole drafty hold, where the old smith, old Garrick, worked the metal that the warriors carried into battle. Garrick was the one creature in the Brameth hold who never looked at Vrika as if she were broken. He was ancient, his tusks yellowed and chipped, one eye milky and blind, his arms still corded with muscle from 60 years at the anvil. The warriors mocked him, too, in their way. A smith was a servant, they said, a tool that made the tools. But the warriors also came crawling to Garrick's forge whenever a blade cracked or an axe head split, and Vrika noticed that. She noticed everything. She was the kind of orc child who sat in the corner of the smithy and watched without ever asking to be taught. She watched the way Garrick read the color of the heated metal, straw, then orange, then the pale yellow that meant it was ready. She watched the way he listened to the iron, tapping it with a small hammer and tilting his head to the ring of it, the way a healer listens to a chest. She learned that iron has a voice, and that the voice tells you everything, if you are quiet enough to hear it. "You've got the ear for it, girl," Garrick told her one evening when she was perhaps 10 years old and had just told him, correctly, that a billet was not yet hot enough by the dull red glow of it. "Most never learned to hear the iron at all. You were born hearing it." He began to teach her then, in the slow, patient way of a craftsman who knows he will not live to see his student's best work. He taught her the bellows first, the steady rhythm of breath that feeds a fire. Too fast and you choke it, too slow and it dies. And there is a tempo, he said, that the fire wants, and your whole body has to learn to feel it. Then the hammer, not the brute swinging the warriors imagined, but the precise, listening blows that move metal where you want it to go. He taught her to quench, to temper, to read the grain of a broken blade and understand why it had failed. "A warrior breaks things," he told her once, holding up a snapped spearhead some Brameth had brought him to mend. "A smith mends them, and makes them, and understands them. The warrior thinks his strength is in his arm, but his strength is in this." He tapped the spearhead. "And this comes from here." He tapped his own chest, over the heart, then his temple. Never let them tell you the one who makes the weapon is lesser than the one who carries it, girl. Without us, they are just angry creatures with sticks. Vrika kept those words the way she kept everything Guruk gave her, folded carefully and put away in the warm place inside her, to be taken out and turned over on the cold nights. She worked the bellows for him until her shoulders burned. She swept the smithy and sorted his scrap and learned the names and natures of 100 different irons by touch and color and the ring they gave under the small hammer. She was happy in the smithy, happier than anywhere else in the whole Brameth hold, because it was the one place where what she could do mattered more than what she refused to do. And he gave her something near the end. Garrick had a hammer, an old one, the head worn smooth and bright, the haft of black mountain oak gone dark with 2 generations of sweat. The clan warriors had never seen it. He kept it wrapped in oiled leather in a chest beneath his bunk. The night before he died, in the winter Vrika turned 15, he pressed it into her hands. "Iron knows the one who deserves it," he said, his blind eye fixed on her, his good eye already half gone to the dark. "Not the loudest, not the strongest, the one who listens. This hammer will travel somewhere you don't expect, girl. A good hammer always does." He died before dawn. The clan gave him a smith's burial, which is to say almost none at all. They burned his body on a small fire behind the forge and went back to their war drills before the embers were cold. Vrika stood by that fire alone until the last of it died, the wrapped hammer clutched against her chest. She had lost the only family she truly had. After that, she kept the hammer with her always. She slept with it. She worked with it when no one was watching, on scraps of iron she scavenged from the slag heap behind the forge. And when she was frightened or angry or so lonely she could not breathe, she would close her hand around that worn black haft and remember that somewhere, once, an old, half-blind smith had looked at her and seen something worth teaching. The Brameth were not cruel orcs. Not exactly. They were proud, and they were stupid in the particular way that proud people are stupid. They could not imagine a strength that did not look like their own. The war mistress wanted Vrika in the training pits. The clan reckoner wanted her counted among the spears. And above all of them stood Grull, the clan race, and his son, Draws, who was everything the Brameth admired. Huge, loud, quick with an axe, and quicker with an insult. Draws had decided, somewhere in their shared childhood, that Vrika's refusal to fight was a personal insult to him. He was the kind of orc who needed everyone beneath him to agree that he stood at the top, and Vrika, quiet, stubborn, indifferent to his strength, would not agree. So he made her life a misery in the small, daily ways that bullies do. He fouled her scrap iron. He overturned her water trough. He told the younger orcs that the smith girl was soft, was broken, was a shame on the Brameth name. Vrika endured it the way she endured the cold and the hunger and the endless war drums, by going inside herself, to the place where the iron sang, where Garrick's voice still told her the color of the metal. She kept her head down. She kept her grades up, you might say. She did just enough at the war drills to avoid a beating, and spent every other waking hour learning the only thing she had ever wanted to learn. By the time she was 17, she was a better smith than any orc in the Brameth hold. Better, perhaps, than Garrick had been. She forged a blade in secret that winter, working at night with stolen coal, and when she finished it, she knew the way you know a true thing, that it was the finest piece of work the hold had ever seen. The grain of the steel rippled like water. The edge would not dull. The balance was so perfect, the blade seemed to want to leap from her hand. She made the mistake of being proud of it. She showed it to no one, but foolishly she did not hide it well enough, and Draws found it. He had been prowling the smithy, looking for some new way to torment her. A fouled trough, a stolen tool, the small cruelties he never tired of. And instead he found the blade, wrapped in cloth, beneath the loose flagstone where she kept her secret work. He unwrapped it, and even Draws, who knew nothing of steel, who had never listened to iron in his life, felt something change in his hand when he held it. It was too good. It was so obviously, undeniably good that it frightened him. And Draws did with his fear what bullies always do. He turned it into cruelty. He held up her blade, her secret, perfect blade, in the great hall, before the whole clan, and he laughed. He said a real Brameth proved their worth in the pit, not in the dirt with the slag and the soot. He said the smith girl had been wasting good coal on a toy while real orcs trained for war. He held it high so all could see, and he sneered at it. And he said that anything made by soft hands would break, like soft hands break. And then, to prove the blade was a toy, he turned to the stone wall of the hall and struck it, hard, with the full force of his great warrior's arm. The blow that should have snapped any blade ever forged and left the smith girl shamed before the whole clan. It did not shatter. It bit a notch into the stone, and rang like a struck bell, a high, clear, singing note that filled the great hall and hung there, and would not stop. Draws struck again, harder, his face twisting. The blade bit deeper. It rang louder. And on the third blow, his own war axe, the blade he carried, the proud Brameth axe some clansmith had hammered out years ago. The axe caught the edge of Rika's steel by accident in the fury of his swing, and chipped. His axe chipped against her toy. The hall went silent, a silence you could have heard a pin drop into, a silence with a held breath inside it. 40 Bramoth warriors looked at the notch in the stone and the chip in their war prince's axe, and the bright, unbroken blade ringing in Draws's white-knuckled fist. And in that one long heartbeat, every creature in that hall understood the thing that Draws could never afterward forgive them for understanding. The smith girl's toy was better than the war prince's weapon. The one they all looked down on had made, with her soft, despised hands, a thing none of their proud, strong hands could match or even harm. Draws understood it too. And of all the things in the world he could not forgive, that one, being shown small, being shown wrong in front of the whole clan by the creature he had spent his life despising, that one he could not forgive at all. He went to his father, the rest, that very night. What was said between them, Vrika never fully knew, but she could guess at the shape of it. Draws would not have said the true thing, that the smith girl's blade had shamed his axe, that her quiet craft had humiliated his loud strength before the whole clan. No, he would have dressed it in the language of the Brameth, the language of honor and worth, and what a true orc owes the hold. He would have said she was a corruption, a softness, a creature whose very existence was an argument against everything the clan believed. And his father, who believed those things with his whole heart, would have heard the true thing underneath. My son was shamed by her, and agreed to fix it, because that is what fathers like Grohl do. The next morning, the morning of her 18th birthday by the reckoning of the clan, she came to the forge and found her few belongings bundled by the door, and Grohl the race waiting with his arms crossed and his face like stone. "You are not Brameth," he told her. "A Brameth fights. You will not fight. You shame the warriors with your refusal, and you shame the smiths by being better than your place. There is no room in this hold for a creature that does not know what it is." He told her other things, too, harder things, the kind of things that lodge in the chest and never fully work their way out. He said she had always been a burden. He said Garrick should have known better than to fill her head. He said her mother, who had died birthing her, would have been ashamed. And then he gave her a single copper coin. "For the road," he said, as if it were a kindness. "When you are ready to be a true orc, you know where the hold stands." Vrika did not argue. She had learned long ago that arguing with the Brammoth was like arguing with the mountain. The mountain does not move, and you only break your hands against it. She picked up her bundle. She took up Garrick's hammer and her own perfect blade, which Draws, in his contempt, had not even bothered to confiscate. She put the copper coin in her fist, and she walked out through the great gate of the only home she had ever known, and she did not look back. Behind her she heard Draws's laughter and the laughter of the warriors ringing off the stone. She let it follow her down the mountain. She did not let it inside. For 3 days she walked. The mountain country in those parts is a hard place. Cold rivers, black pine, slopes of broken scree where a careless foot means a broken leg, and a broken leg means death. She ate what she could forage, bitter roots, a handful of late berries. Once a fish she caught with her bare hands in a still pool and ate raw because she dared not light a fire that the Brammoth might see. She slept in the lee of boulders with the hammer for a pillow, and she dreamed those 3 cold nights of the forge, of Garrick's voice, of the ring of the iron, of the one warm place that had ever been hers and was hers no longer. On the second night, the loneliness came for her in earnest. It is one thing to be unwanted in a crowded hold. There is at least the warmth of bodies, the noise of other lives. It is another thing entirely to be alone on a cold mountain with the wind in the pines and no living soul within a day's walk who knows your name or would care if you lived or died. Vrika lay awake under the stars and felt the full weight of it. 18 years old, no clan, no home, no family but a dead smith and a hammer. And she wept once, hard and silent, the way you weep when there is no one to hear. And then she closed her hand around the worn black haft of Garrick's hammer, and she remembered his voice, and the weeping stopped. A good hammer always travels somewhere you don't expect. She did not yet know how right he had been. And she thought, as she walked, about what she was going to do, because 18 years of being told she was worthless had not killed the one stubborn truth at the center of her. She was a smith, the best she had ever known of, and a smith needs only 3 things: a fire, an anvil, and iron. She had none of them. But she had 1 copper coin, and she had heard, the way you hear things at the edges of clan gossip, that the dwarf country to the north was full of empty holes, old dwarf dens abandoned when the dwarf clans dwindled and died, sold off for next to nothing by the human reeves who now claimed that territory and wanted bodies in it to work the played-out mines. On the 4th day, she came down out of the high pines into a river valley, and there she found a human village. Greywater, they called it. A huddle of timber houses around a muddy crossroads, the kind of place that exists only because 2 roads happened to meet there. The humans stared at her, an orc girl alone with a hammer and a blade. But orcs were not unknown in that country, and the lone orc is no great threat, so they let her be. At the village hall she found a human reeve, a thin, tired man with ink-stained fingers who kept the ledgers of all the land thereabouts. She asked him, in the rough trade tongue that orcs and humans share, whether it was true that dwarf dens could be bought. He looked at her over his spectacles. "Bought, aye," he said, "if you can call it buying. There's holes in these hills no one wants. Dwarves are gone, mines are dry, and a dwarf den's no place for a human, too small, too dark, too full of ghosts. Why, you looking to buy a hole in the ground, Orc? I am, Vrika said. The Reeve laughed, not unkindly, and pulled out a great, cracked leather ledger. He turned the pages, running his finger down columns of holdings. Most of the dens, he said, came with conditions. You had to work the mine, or pay a yearly due, or keep the road clear. Those she could not afford. But there was one, he said, tapping a line near the bottom of a page, that had no conditions at all. No one would take it. Why not? Vrika asked. Bad business, that one, the Reeve said. Old Hearth's Delve, it's called. Deep den dug into Coldhammer Mountain a day north of here. Belonged to a dwarf clan called the Carthoon. Mastersmiths, they were, the finest in these mountains 200 years back. Then one winter they were all killed. Every one. Raiders, the story goes, though no one ever found the gold the raiders were supposed to have come for. The Carthoon smiths were famous rich, but when men finally went into the delve, years later, it was empty. Picked clean. Not a coin, not an ingot, not a tool worth the carrying. Stripped to the bare stone. And no one has lived there since? Vrika asked. Would you? The Reeve said. A whole clan murdered in their beds, and the place stripped bare by ghosts or thieves, no one knows which. The few who've tried to settle there left inside a season. Said the dark didn't sit right. Said they heard hammers in the deep where no hammers should be. He shrugged. Superstition, like as not. But the delve's been empty 40 years now, and the crown wants bodies in this country, so they'll sell it to anyone fool enough to want it. 1 copper coin and your mark on the ledger, and old Hearth's delve is yours, ghosts and all. Vrika put her 1 copper coin on the table. The Reeve looked at it. He looked at her. You understand what I'm telling you, Orc. Empty. Stripped. A dead clan's tomb. You'll have a roof of stone over your head, and naught else. No tools, no iron, no gold. Nothing but the dark and whatever your own 2 hands can make of it. My own 2 hands, Vrika said, are all I have ever needed. She made her mark on the ledger. The Reeve gave her a great iron key, cold and heavy, and rough directions north along the river to the foot of Coldhammer Mountain. And as she turned to go, he called after her. Orc, there's a saying the dwarves had. The hearth holds what the heart cannot carry. Don't know what it means, but the Carthoon carved it over every doorway in that delve. Thought you ought to know, since you'll be reading it a while. Vrika walked north along the cold river through the better part of a day, and as the light began to fail, she came to the foot of Coldhammer Mountain, a great gray fang of stone streaked with snow even in the late summer, and in its base, framed by 2 pillars of carved dwarf stone gone green with moss, was a door. It was a dwarf door, which meant it was low and broad and made for folk built closer to the ground than orcs. It was banded in iron that should have rusted away to nothing in 200 years, but had not, and Vrika, smith that she was, noticed that at once and filed it away. Above the door, carved deep into the stone lintel in the angular runes of the dwarves, but also, beneath, in the trade script that any mountain dweller could read, were the words the Reeve had spoken. The hearth holds what the heart cannot carry. The great iron key turned in the lock as if it had been oiled yesterday. The door swung inward without a sound. And Vrika, orphan and outcast, owner now of a dead clan's tomb, stooped beneath the low lintel and stepped into the dark. It was cold inside, and black as the inside of a fist, and it smelled of old stone and older dust. She had a stub of candle she'd bought in Greywater, and she lit it, and by its small light she saw that the reeve had told the truth. The delve was vast. A great main hall hewn from the living rock, with side passages running off into the dark, galleries and sleeping cells and storerooms. And it was empty. Stripped. The dwarves who had lived here had left their stone behind, because you cannot carry stone. But everything else was gone. Every tool, every stick of furniture, every scrap of metal. Bare rock and dust and silence. And ghosts, perhaps. Vrika did not believe in ghosts, but standing in that vast, cold dark, with the small flame of her candle, the only living light, she understood why others might. The place felt watched. It felt like it was holding its breath. At the far end of the main hall, she found the forge. Of course there was a forge. The Carthoon had been master smiths, and a smith clan builds its life around its fire. The forge was enormous, the greatest Vrika had ever seen, a hearth of black basalt wide enough to heat a dozen billets at once, with the stone chimney rising up into the dark above and the great stone trough where the bellows would have stood. The bellows were gone, of course, everything was gone, but the hearth itself remained, because the hearth was carved from the mountain's own bone and could not be carried away. Vrika stood before that cold, dead forge for a long time. And then, because she was a smith and could not help herself, she stepped up onto the hearthstone, a single great slab of black basalt, worn smooth by 200 years of dwarf feet, and she laid her bare palm flat against the cold stone of the firebox, the way Garrick had taught her to feel a forge, to know its bones. And she felt it. Beneath her palm, deep in the stone, where no warmth should have been in a fire 2 centuries dead, the faintest, strangest hum. Not heat, something else. A vibration so low she felt it in her teeth more than heard it. The kind of ring that iron makes, very far away, when something strikes it. She knelt on the great hearthstone. She set down her candle, and she ran her fingers along the edges of the slab, the way she would run them along a blade looking for the flaw. And she found, at the back of the firebox, where the soot was thickest, where no one cleaning out a fire would ever think to look, a seam, a line in the stone too straight to be natural, a joint. The hearthstone was a lid. It took her the rest of that night and all of the next day to lift it. She had no tools but Garrick's hammer and her own blade and her own great orcish strength, and the slab was monstrous heavy. She levered it with her blade. She struck the seam with the hammer, listening, always listening, for the give in the stone. She mixed sweat and soot and tore her palms bloody on the basalt. And at last, near dusk on the second day, with a grinding groan that echoed down every black passage of the dead delve, the hearthstone shifted and tilted and slid aside. Below it was a vault. And in the vault, by the light of her guttering candle, Vrika saw what 200 years of thieves and ghost-frightened settlers had never found, because they had been looking in the galleries and the storerooms and the sleeping cells, in all the places a clan keeps its wealth. They had never thought to look beneath the fire. They had never understood that a smith clan does not hide its treasure in a strong room. A smith clan hides it where the heart of the clan beats hottest, beneath the hearth. There was gold, not coins. The Carthoon had been smiths, not merchants, but ingots, raw and dense and gleaming dull in the candlelight, stacked in courses like bricks. More gold than Vrika had ever seen or imagined, more gold than the whole Brameth hold could have shown. And there was more than gold. There were ingots of other metals she half recognized and half did not, a silvery blue metal that seemed to drink the candlelight, a black metal veined with red. And there were tools, the Carthoon smith tools, the real ones, the master tools, wrapped in oiled dwarf leather that had kept them bright for 2 centuries. Hammers and tongs and chisels and gravers of a quality Vrika had only ever dreamed of. And at the very bottom of the vault, wrapped most carefully of all, was a book. A great iron-bound ledger, its pages of treated dwarf vellum still supple, covered edge to edge in the angular runes of the dwarves, and Vrika, who could read the trade script but not the deep runes, despaired for one moment that she would never know what it said. But then she turned a page and found that the Carthoon mastersmith who had filled this book had written, beside each entry of runes, the same words in the trade script, so that any smith of any folk might read it. It was a smith's book, a book of secrets. 200 years of Carthoon craft, the formulae for their famous steel, the temperatures and the timings, the way to fold the silver-blue metal so it held an edge no whetstone could ever spoil, the lost art of welding the red-veined black iron that the dwarves had called heart iron. It was worth more than all the gold beneath it. Vrika knelt in that vault until her candle burned down to nothing, reading by its last light, and then, in the dark, with the book open on her knees, weeping, though she would never have admitted it, for the old dwarf smith who had filled these pages, and for Garrick, who would have given his good eye to read them, and for herself, 18 years old and cast out and worthless, kneeling now in a fortune that the proudest clan in the mountains could not have bought. At the front of the book, before the formulae began, the mastersmith had written a single entry. Vrika read it 100 times in the days that followed, and came to know it by heart. We are the Carthoon, smiths of Coldhammer, and the raiders are coming. We have known for 3 days. We are too few to fight and too proud to run, and so we will do the only thing a smith can do. We will leave our craft for the one who comes after. They will take our lives, but they will not take our fire. To whoever finds this, the gold is yours and welcome. But the gold is the least of it. Learn the book. Light the hearth. Make something worthy. The hearth holds what the heart cannot carry, and we could not carry our craft past the dark that is coming. So we leave it here, in the warm place, for the next hand that knows how to listen to the iron. Iron knows the one who deserves it. We trust the fire to find them. Iron knows the one who deserves it. The very words Garrick had spoken, 200 years and 100 miles apart. Vrika closed the book and held it to her chest, and for the first time since the great gate of the Brameth hold had ground shut behind her, she did not feel cast out. She felt chosen. She did not sleep that first night. She sat on the edge of the open vault with the book in her lap and Garrick's hammer beside her. And she thought about all the hands that had touched this craft before her own. The Carthoon mastersmith, writing his last entry with the raiders 3 days out, choosing, with his whole world ending, to leave a gift for a stranger he would never meet. Garrick, half blind in the Brameth dark, pressing his hammer into the hands of a girl everyone else called broken. 2 old smiths, an age and a world apart, who had never met and never could, and who had both looked into the future and decided to trust it with the thing they loved most. And here she was, the stranger they had trusted, the one the fire had found. 18 years old, cast out, worth 1 copper coin by the reckoning of the only family she had ever known, and chosen across all that distance by the dead to carry their fire forward. It was almost too large a thing to hold. Vreike sat in the cold dark and let it settle into her, slowly, the way heat settles into iron, until it was not a thought anymore, but a part of the metal of her, something that would never again come out. She was not worthless. She had never been worthless. She had simply been born among people who could not see. And now she had walked far enough that the seeing folk, even the dead ones, could find her at last. She did not run to spend the gold. That was the first thing, and the most important thing, and the thing that everyone in the story who came after her always got wrong when they told it. They thought the treasure was the gold, Vreike better. The gold was tools and time. The treasure was the book and the forge and the long, patient work of becoming worthy of both. So she stayed. She lived in the delve through that first hard autumn, eating sparely, spending only the smallest pinch of the Carthune gold, a single ingot taken down to Greywater and sold quietly to the Reeves brother who dealt in metals, enough to buy bellows and coal and food for the winter and a goat for milk. She told no one what she had found. She let them go on thinking the delve was empty, let them go on hearing hammers in the deep and calling it ghosts. For there were hammers in the deep now, hers, ringing late into every night as she taught herself the Carthune craft from the book, billet by ruined billet, failure by failure, learning. And oh, she failed. The first heart iron she tried to weld cracked and spat and nearly took her eye. The silver-blue metal, true silver, the book called it, shattered like glass the first dozen times she folded it wrong. She burned herself. She wasted coal. She wept with frustration in the small hours when the iron would not sing the way the book promised it would sing. There was one whole winter, the second winter, the hard one, when she nearly gave it up. She had ruined a month's worth of coal and a precious ingot of true silver trying to fold it into a blade core, and the metal had failed her again, and she sat on the cold hearthstone with the shattered work in her lap and thought, for the first time, that perhaps the Brameth had been right. Perhaps she was not enough. Perhaps the Carthune had left their craft for someone better, someone who had not been thrown away, and she was only a thief squatting in a dead clan's tomb, ruining their gold with her clumsy hands. And then she opened the book again. She always opened the book again. And she read past the formula she had failed at, to a line the master-smith had scratched in the margin, almost as an afterthought, the kind of thing one smith writes for another who will understand. If the true silver shatters, you have rushed the fold. The metal is not stubborn, you are impatient. Heat it slow, fold it slow. The iron keeps no grudge against the hand that learns from its mistakes. Vreike read that line and wiped her eyes and went back to the fire. She heated the metal slow, she folded it slow. And that time, the true silver took the fold like water closing over a stone, and held and rang true when she tapped it, and Vreike laughed out loud in the empty dark of the delve, a sound she had not made in years. She had Garrick's ear and the Carthune's book, and a stubbornness that 18 years of contempt had forged harder than any steel. And slowly, billet by billet, season by season, failure by patient failure, she learned. She learned the true silver and the hard iron and the great folded steel the Carthune were famous for. She learned tricks the book only hinted at and worked out for herself on long nights, the things the dead smith had known so well he never thought to write them down. The iron stopped fighting her. It began, instead, to answer, and the day came when she laid her palm on a finished blade and felt nothing wrong in it anywhere. No flaw, no weakness, no false note in the whole length of the steel. And she knew that she had become, alone in the dark, the thing Garrick had always seen in her. By the following summer, she could make Carthoon steel. By the autumn after that, she could weld heart iron. And by the time 2 years had passed in the deep, warm dark of old Carth's delve, Vrika, the outcast smith girl, could do work that no living smith in all the mountains could match, because the only ones who had ever known these secrets were 200 years dead, and had left them to her, and to no one else. The first blade she made that truly satisfied her, she carried down to Greywater and showed to the Reeve. Not to sell, to see his face. He took it in his ink-stained hands and turned it in the light, and his thin, tired face went slack with wonder. "Where," he breathed, "did a thing like this come from?" "From a hole in the ground," Vrika said, "that no one wanted." Word of the smith in Coldhammer Mountain spread the way word of true quality always spreads, slowly at first, then all at once. A trader bought that first blade and sold it 3 valleys over for 10 times what he paid. A mercenary captain came all the way up the cold river to commission a sword, and went away swearing he'd never carry another. A human lord sent a steward with a purse of gold for a set of blades, and Vrika, who did not need his gold, who had a vault of it beneath her fire, charged him double and made him wait, and the Lord only made the Lord want it more. She learned, in those years, a thing that the warriors of the Brameth had never understood and never would. The warrior believes that worth is something you seize, that you take it by force, prove it in the pit, hammer it out of the bodies of those weaker than you. But that is not how worth works at all. Worth is something the world comes to recognize, slowly, and once it has recognized it, the world will travel 100 miles up a cold river and stand at your door with a purse in its hands. Vrika had spent 18 years being told she had no worth by creatures who had no eye to see it. Now, lords and captains and traders crossed mountains to put gold in her scarred hands, and she understood at last that her worth had never been the thing in question. The eyes that judged it had simply been blind. She did not let the gold or the praise turn her head. She remembered the mastersmith's note, "Make something worthy," and she held herself to it. She turned away commissions she found ugly. She refused to make a blade for a man whose eyes she did not like, and the refusal only made her name greater, because a smith who cannot be bought is a smith whose work means something. She signed every finished piece with a small mark struck near the hilt, a hammer, and beneath it, an open ear. Garrick's 2 gifts. The ones who carried her blades never knew what the mark meant. Vrika knew, and that was enough. She was careful with her growing wealth, and careful with her growing name. She rebuilt the delve slowly into something between a workshop and a fortress. She cleared the caved-in shaft and shored the galleries. She raised great new bellows over the Carthoon hearth, twice the size of any she had known, and the first time she fed that ancient firebox a proper fire, the first real fire it had held in 200 years, she stood and watched the flames climb and felt, absurdly, as though she were waking something that had only been sleeping. The hum she had felt beneath her palm that first night was the forge itself, she came to believe, waiting in the cold dark for someone to light it again. She had lit it. The delve was alive once more. She hired help eventually, not orcs at first, but a pair of human apprentices from Greywater, a brother and sister with quick hands and quiet manners, whose own father, a drunkard, had no use for them. Vrika took them in, fed them, taught them the simple work first, the bellows, the sweeping, the sorting of iron, the same way Garrick had once started her. She was a hard teacher, but never a cruel one. She never raised her hand to them, never mocked them, never once made them feel that what they could not yet do was a shame upon them. She remembered too well what that felt like. And later there came a dwarf, an actual dwarf, one of the last of a wandering, broken clan who had heard, in the way such things travel, that someone was working Carthun steel in the old country. He came up the cold river not to buy and not to work, but simply to see, because he did not believe it could be true. Vrika led him into the delve and showed him the great hearth and the hall, and at last the book. And the old dwarf wept. He wept the way you weep at the grave of someone you loved, because the Carthun had been his people's people, the great smiths of the age, lost and mourned and thought gone forever. And here was their whole craft, alive, in the scarred hands of an orc. He stayed. Of course he stayed. He helped Vrika read the parts of the book her trade script could not reach, the deep runes that held the oldest secrets, and in return she gave him what he had not had in 40 wandering years, a fire to sit beside, and work worth doing, and folk who were glad of him. She paid them all well. She taught them all what she could. She built, around the dead clan's fire, something that began to feel, for the first time in her life, like a clan of her own. Not a clan of blood, but a clan of the fire, which she was coming to believe was the better kind. And the iron sang. All day and half the night the hammers rang in Coldhammer Mountain, and the smoke of the great Carthun hearth rose white against the grey stone, and the saying carved over the door came true in a way the dead dwarves could never have foreseen. The hearth had held what the heart could not carry, had held it patient for 200 years, and given it at last to the one hand that knew how to listen. But this is a story of vengeance as much as triumph, and so we must come back now to the Brameth. They had not prospered in the years since they cast Vrika out. Warrior clans rarely do in the long run. They are very good at taking and very bad at making, and a clan that cannot make must always take, and there is only so much taking a country will bear before it turns and takes back. The Brameth had quarreled with their neighbors. They had lost a feud, and then a second feud, and good orcs in both. And their weapons, the spears and axes that were the whole of their pride, had begun to fail them, because old Garrick was dead, and the smiths who'd replaced him were no Garrick, and a warrior clan with failing steel is a warrior clan living on borrowed time. There is a grim justice in how it happened, and Vrika, when she heard the tale years later, did not laugh, though she might have. In a battle against the Koreth clan over a contested valley, a dozen Brameth axes had snapped at the haft socket in a single afternoon, the cheap, brittle work of the smiths who came after Garrick, and a dozen Brameth warriors had died because the tools they trusted had betrayed them at the worst moment. The clan that had thrown away the finest smith in the mountains for the crime of being a smith was now dying, quite literally, for want of good steel. They had mocked the maker and worshipped the carrier, and the carriers were going into the ground because no one had thought the maker mattered. It was Draz who first heard of the smith in Coldhammer Mountain. He was Rhys now. Old Grull had died, choked on his own pride and a chicken bone at a feast, and Draz ruled the Brameth in his father's place, ruled them into one losing feud after another. And Draz heard, as everyone in the mountains was beginning to hear, that there was a smith in the dwarf country to the north whose blades did not break, whose steel bit stone and rang like a bell, and Draz, who needed exactly such blades and could find them nowhere else, swallowed his pride and made the long journey north to buy them. He did not know who the smith was. That was the thing Vrika had been waiting for. through all the long years of work, though she would not have admitted even to herself that she was waiting. She had let her name spread as the Coldhammer Smith, and never as Vrika, never as Orc, never as outcast. And so Draws came up the cold river with a wagon and a purse and 3 of his warriors, came to buy salvation for his failing clan, and had no idea whose door he was knocking on. She let him wait. She let him stand in the great rebuilt hall of the delve beneath the carved words over the inner door for the better part of an hour, while her dwarf and her 2 human apprentices told him the Coldhammer Smith was busy, was not to be disturbed, would see him when the work allowed. She let the war prince of the Brameth cool his heels like a beggar in the hold of the orc he had thrown away. And then she came out. She had grown in the years between. She was taller even than before, broad through the shoulder from the anvil, her arms ridged with smith's muscle, her hands scarred and sure. She wore a leather apron scorched with the marks of her trade, and at her belt hung Garrick's old hammer, the head worn bright as silver. And on her face she wore nothing at all, no anger, no triumph, no welcome, just the flat, listening calm of a smith who has learned that iron and grudges are both best worked cold. It took Draws a moment to know her. She watched it happen, watched the war prince's eyes move over the famous Coldhammer Smith and snag and falter and widen, watched the color leave his green face. "You," he said. "Me," said Vrika. What a thing it must have been for him to have come crawling 100 miles for blades he could not make and could not live without, and to find at the end of the road the smith girl he had broken a blade against a wall to humiliate, the orc he had laughed out the great gate, the worthless creature his father had given a single copper coin and cast into the cold. To find her here, in a hall of stone and gold, mistress of a craft no living hand could match, with his clan's survival hanging on her good will. He tried, at first, the old way. He drew himself up to his full, great height, and he reminded her that she was Brameth-born, that blood was blood, that a true orc helped her clan in its need. He spoke of duty. He spoke of family. Vrika let him finish. Then she said, very quietly, "You told me I was not Brameth. Your father told me at the gate, with the whole hold listening. You are not Brameth," he said. "There is no room in this hold for a creature that does not know what it is." She let the words hang in the cold air of the delve. "I know what I am now, Draws. I am the smith you cannot do without. And you are right. Blood is blood. You have none of mine." He raged then. He threatened. 3 warriors at his back, and the old habit of taking what the Brameth wanted. For one ugly moment the hall was very tense, and Vrika's dwarf set his hand on his own axe, and her apprentices went still. But Vrika did not move, and did not reach for a weapon, and only looked at Draws with that flat, cold, listening calm, and said, "Strike the wall, Draws, like you struck my blade all those years ago. Go on. There are 40 mountain clans within a week's ride who would pay anything for what I make, and exactly one of them has spent its name on losing feuds until no one will sell it grain, let alone steel. You did not come here to threaten me. You came here because you are dying, and I am the only one who can save you. So put away your father's voice and your father's threats, and ask me. Ask me properly. Ask me the way a clan that has nothing asks a smith that has everything." And the war prince of the Brameth, huge, proud, raised from birth to believe that strength was the only thing in the world that mattered, stood in the hall of the orc he had thrown away, and understood at last that he had been wrong about the whole shape of the world. That the loudest is not the strongest. That the hammer outlasts the axe. That the one who listens inherits what the one who shouts can only lose. You could see it break across his face, slowly, the way ice breaks on a river in spring. The certainty of a whole lifetime. The certainty his father had handed him and his father before that. The certainty that warriors were the high folk and makers were the low. That strength meant the arm and not the mind. That worth was a thing you proved with violence. It had been the floor he stood on his whole life, and now, in the hall of the smith girl he had broken a blade to humiliate, he felt it give way beneath him, and there was nothing underneath it but the long, cold drop of being wrong. His 3 warriors saw it too. They saw their rays falter, saw him look down at his own scarred hands, saw him understand. And something passed through them. Not loyalty, exactly, but the dawning awareness that they had followed this orc and his father into 2 lost feuds and a dozen graves, all in service of a pride that had just been shown in one quiet hall to be hollow all the way through. He asked. Not properly, not gracefully. Draws did not have it in him to be gracious. But he asked, the words dragged out of him like teeth. He needed blades. The Brameth were dying. Would she sell? I will sell, Fricka said. And here is the thing that everyone who tells this story remembers, the thing the children in the mountain holds still laugh over by the fire. She did sell. She did not turn him away. She did not let his warriors die on bad steel for the satisfaction of it. That would have been the small revenge, the warrior's revenge, the Brameth revenge. And Vrika was not Brameth. They had told her so themselves. She sold him the finest blades in the mountains, at 4 times the price she charged anyone else, payable in advance, in gold, with no blade leaving her hall until the last coin was counted. She made the Brameth, the proud Brameth, who had measured all worth by the spear, pay through the nose for the work of the smith girl they had thrown away. She made them depend on her, season after season, year after year, returning up the cold river with their purses to buy from the outcast the only thing keeping their clan alive. She made Draws look her in the eye each time and count out the gold, and know exactly whose hand had made the thing that saved him. That was the revenge. Not to destroy them, to make them need her, and pay her, and know it. In time, the gold the Brameth paid her, and the gold a dozen other clans paid her, for her name had become the greatest in the mountains, she did not even keep. She had enough. The Carthoon vault and the work of her own 2 hands had made her richer than any race. So she did with the new gold what the dead dwarves had done with theirs. She set it aside for the next one. She took in outcasts. That was what the delve became in the end, and what made her name remembered long after the blades themselves had rusted away. Any creature thrown out of its clan for being the wrong shape, too quiet, too soft, too strange, too clever, too anything the proud could not abide. Any such creature who could find the cold river and follow it north to Coldhammer Mountain was welcome at Fricka's fire. She taught them the craft, or some other craft, or simply gave them a warm place and honest work and the radical, strange experience of being wanted. There was a goblin girl who came one winter, half-starved, cast out by her warren for being too small even by goblin reckoning. Vrika discovered the child had hands quick and clever beyond anything, fingers made for the fine work, the engraving and the inlay. And within 3 years, that goblin girl was doing detail work on Vrika's blades that buyers came from across the mountains to see. There was an old orc warrior of all things, a Brameth even, cast out in his age when he could no longer fight, the very fate the clan reserved for those who had given it everything, who came to the delve expecting nothing, and found that Vrika set him to teaching the young ones their letters and their numbers, and gave him back, in his last years, the dignity his own clan had stripped away. Vrika did not turn him away for being Brameth. She had learned, by then, that the clan was not the creature, and that even the ones who throw you out are sometimes thrown out in their turn. Orcs and humans and dwarves and goblins and folk of no clan at all, the broken and the cast-off and the worthless by the reckoning of the proud, all of them gathered at the great Carthoon hearth and made, between them, something better than any clan of blood. They did not share an ancestor. They shared a fire, and Vrika came to believe, in her later years, that a fire shared is a stronger bond than any blood, because blood you are simply born into, but a fire you choose, and the choosing is the whole of it. One evening, late in her life, Vrika sat on the worn black hearthstone of the great forge, the very slab she had levered up with her blade and her bleeding hands all those years ago, and watched the fire and listened to the hammers of her apprentices ringing in the deep, and thought about the Carthoon. She thought about the mastersmith who had filled the book, who had known the raiders were coming and had 3 days to decide what to do with everything his clan had ever learned. He could have hidden the gold and run. He could have buried the book and prayed. Instead, he had left it all in the warm place beneath the fire, with a note for a hand he would never see, trusting the iron to know the one who deserved it, trusting the fire to find them. And it had. Across 200 years, across the deaths of a whole clan, across all the miles between a murdered dwarf hold and a cast-out orc girl with 1 copper coin, the fire had found her. The hearth had held the Carthoon's craft as patiently as a hand holds something precious that is not its own, and given it, at the last, to the one who would light it again. She thought about Garrick, too, who had told her the same words the dead dwarves had carved. Iron knows the one who deserves it, and who had left her the only inheritance that had ever mattered, not the hammer, though she still carried it, but the ear, the listening, the patience to hear what the iron was trying to say. And she thought, with something that was no longer anger and not quite forgiveness, but something cooler and cleaner than either, about the Brameth, about Draws, grown old and grizzled now, still Rays, still coming up the cold river twice a year with his gold, because there was nowhere else to buy what kept his clan alive. About Grull, long dead, who had given her a single copper coin and called it a kindness. About all of them who had looked at her and seen something broken, something worthless, something that did not know what it was. She knew what she was. She had always known. They simply had not had the ear to hear it. The dwarf saying was carved over the inner door of the delve, where she could see it from the hearthstone, lit gold by the firelight. The hearth holds what the heart cannot carry. Vrika had come, over the long years, to understand what it meant, better, perhaps, than the dwarves who carved it. Some things are too heavy to carry through a whole life. A clan's whole craft, with the raiders 3 days out. A grief too large for a 15-year-old standing alone by a smith's burning body. An anger too sharp to hold against the ones who threw you away. These things you cannot carry, but you can set them down in the warm place. You can leave them at the hearth, the craft, the grief, the anger, and the hearth will hold them and turn them slowly into heat, into light, into something that warms the next hand to reach for it. That, she understood now, was the cruelty the Bramith had never grasped, and the wisdom the Carthoon had built their whole clan upon. The warrior carries everything, every grudge, every wound, every insult, and carries it as a weapon, heavy and sharp, until the weight of it bends his back and the edge of it cuts his own hand. But the smith knows that the heaviest metal becomes the finest blade only after it has been put into the fire. You do not carry the iron, you give it to the hearth. And what comes back out is not the raw weight you put in. It is something made, something worthy, something that can be of use. Vrika had put 18 years of contempt into the fire of that forge, and what had come back out was not bitterness. It was a life. It was a craft. It was a clan of the cast-off, warming themselves at a fire the dead had left burning for exactly this. The Carthoon had set down their craft, and it had become Vrika's life. Vrika had set down her anger, and it had become a fire that warmed every outcast in the mountains. The heart cannot carry everything, but the hearth can hold it, and the holding is not the end of the thing. It is the beginning of what the thing becomes. Vrika the Cold Hammer Smith died old and rich and surrounded by a clan of her own choosing in the warm dark of a den a dead people had left her for 1 copper coin. And the last thing she did, they say, was the same thing the Carthoon had done before her. She left the book beneath the hearth with the gold and a note in her own hand beneath the master smith's 200-year-old words. I was thrown away, she wrote, and the fire found me. To whoever finds this, you were not thrown away. You were set down in the warm place to be found by the one who knows how to listen. Learn the book, light the hearth, make something worthy. And when your time comes, leave it for the next one. The hearth holds what the heart cannot carry, and you, whoever you are worth the holding. She was 18 years old, and they threw her out with 1 copper coin. She spent it on a hole in the ground that no one wanted, a dead clan's tomb, stripped bare, worth less than the coin itself. It was the best copper coin ever spent in all the history of those mountains. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who's ever been told they were worthless by people who simply couldn't hear what they were. And tell us in the comments, what have you set down at the hearth and waited to see what it became? We'd love to hear your story. See you in the next one.